it over to Mike Roos and Kelly Tabler. They're going to run the show and tell us all the cool stuff there is about Azure DevOps and how it's going to save your lives. So,
yeah, as long as Kelly doesn't break her setup.
As long as I don't knock over my camera.
we have been practicing this all week, really, Mark, and we don't want any snafus. So hi everyone, and thanks for joining. And I'm Mike. That's Kelly.
Hello. All right, so I think we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves. Do we want to go ahead and kick off fully, Mark, or do we want to wait until 5:45 to let more trickle in?
Tell you what, do you want to just kind of talk a little bit about yourselves and kind of give you their background and maybe just a little bit of setup as to why this is valuable, why we're talking about it today, and just kind of ease us into it and kind of get into the meat of it in 10 minutes. How's that?
Absolutely. If you want me to ramble for 10 minutes, I am like the perfect person to do that. I can ramble as long as you like me to. But yes, absolutely. So introduce myself. Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Tabler. I am with Improving. I've been with Improving for about 8 years now. I started as an app developer and have moved into the DevOps realm within the past couple of years. Similar kind of to what Mark said, sometimes you just start a project and you're handed here's a solution, we're using this. And that started happening to me with Azure DevOps Spaces, and I found I really like it. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can do when anything that comes to modern app development is so easy and so fast with DevOps. So I've become kind of an evangelist of it. I think it's one of those things where as soon as you really get into it and see the DevOps light, it's going to be everything that you want to do, and you can't imagine living without it. I am a big fan. We're looking forward to talking with you today about CI/CD. I think this is people's usually first foray into that. As soon as they see the fact that they can commit some code and then it's pretty much instantly in an environment, they love that. And we're hoping that you guys love it too. So we'll show you some cool stuff here. And I will get on back to Mike and let him talk about himself a little bit.
Thanks, Kelly. So as you can see, just kind of a little bit of a warning is there may be a little bit of a lag of audio with Kelly, just because she's actually streaming to me. We're using Skype for that, and then I'm embedding that, and then I'm streaming it up to Zoom. So there may be some little bits of audio synchronization issues. We apologize for that. We don't have the $100,000 equipment that networks do, but we're kind of doing it anyway. On a shoestring. So anyway, thanks for all that stuff, Kelly, that you provided. And I'm, I've been doing software development for 25 years or so. I actually started out way back when I was a kid. But in the last probably 6 years or so, I really started getting more into automation and getting out of the development phase and then just building up dev teams and QA teams and DevOps teams. And I found that DevOps is really my sweet spot. Love DevOps. I joined Improving specifically to help form the DevOps kind of initiatives that they have here. I've been with them almost 2 years now. I like what I'm doing an awful lot. And to me, it's kind of easy, but at the same time, there's some challenges on trying to figure stuff out that other people are not figuring out. What we're going to demonstrate today is not just CI/CD, but it's actually a kind of a function within Azure itself called app configuration. And we're using that for two pieces as we get into more of the demonstration. One is building infrastructure, using infrastructure as code. So we'll have a little bit of touch of that. And then actually using the app configuration in Azure for feature flags, which we'll get into in the second half of our discussion. I don't know, Kelly, you tell me, did I cover everything you think?
I think so. I mean, I vote that we jump right on into it, and we're 6 minutes early, but I think that's good. I'd say we jump in. That way everyone has time to ask any sort of questions or thoughts that we have at the end. Anyone want us to wait?
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's go get started.
All right.
All right, so Kelly, it's all you.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So as Mike said, we've got kind of we hope, very cool setup here. but please be patient with us if we like switch to the wrong screen or have some delays there. We're hoping to give you guys kind of the best of all worlds here. So we are going to be talking about CI/CD with Azure DevOps and app configuration. And though we talked about Azure DevOps and Azure app configuration, a lot of the concepts that we have here can apply regardless of what technology that you're using. Obviously, when we're showing you things like code and stuff, that's particular to that technology. But conceptually, this can apply to so much. So think about that as we're going through this, that it's not just one particular technology, but it's really conceptual that we want to show you. So here's our faces in case you didn't see our videos as well. You can immortalize us in some great pictures here. We're both out of the Atlanta office of Improving. So DevOps, why do you want to do it? Some people will see it as a pain. It's just more coding that I have to do. Can't I just set up a server once and not deal with anything again? And then you might run into issues like Mark mentioned, where we haven't deployed this in 6 months and everything's going wrong. So DevOps can really help in a lot of those areas. Some cool stats here that we pulled from a State of DevOps survey that was done in 2019. And I think really provides some great information about why you want to do this. The big players in the industry, your Googles, your Netflixes, they do this. They have thousands of deployments a day. And that's totally normal for them. So you can deploy 208 times more frequently on average. So that's not even like Netflix does it 208 times more frequently. That's everyone who's adopted DevOps. So the key here, though, is that next stat, the 2,600 times faster incident recovery. And a lot of that is the concept of we're going to find issues earlier and quicker, and thus they're going to be easier to resolve because I'm going to find it before it completely blows up in my face. And if it does, I have a greater chance to recover from that because everything is so code-based and repeatable. Everything can happen faster also just from your normal day-to-day development time. You're using a Scrum methodology, you're working in sprints, just going from actual development to being able to put something into production, you can be about 100 times faster on average using DevOps concepts. And then the lower failure rate, that's part of that shifting everything earlier into the process so that I'm going to find those bugs. I'm going to find those deployment issues. I'm going to find the corner cases I didn't think about during the development time rather than the production time. I don't always test my code, but when I do, it's in production. That's not a thing that happens in DevOps. And then there's like some deeper stats here. I'm not going to read those to you about how different performers kind of use the various portions of DevOps, but just some really valuable information here. This is like DevOps is where everything is going. It can apply to so many technologies, especially to the cloud-based world, where everything is so much more disposable and repeatable. This is something that's really accessible to pretty much everything that you're doing. So before we get into the practical, I'm going to talk about the abstract ideas of what is continuous integration, continuous deployment. What does that mean, and why should you be doing it? The core of it is to make small, really frequent changes so that I can eliminate a lot of the variability in what might be causing an error. I'm not going to take 6 months to develop a new feature. I'm going to do small pieces of it on a weekly basis or a daily basis so that happens really fast and you can figure out what things are happening and where things might be going wrong earlier rather than later. It really ties into that Scrum concept, that Agile concept. Then shift left, which I have alluded to. You might hear that phrase a lot when it comes to QA and DevOps and how they tie together. But you want to validate early. I don't want to find out when I'm in production that when someone enters in an email address with the period, it breaks. I want to find that out back in dev. Right alongside that, I want to fail early. Don't be afraid of failure when it comes to DevOps because I'm going to find it at the beginning. I'm going to fail at the beginning. I can try exciting new things without having to wait to see if they do it in production. Sharing with others is pretty major because if I go off into a cold, dark room and develop something, I might be developing the wrong thing. I want to identify the wrong thing early by sharing my code with everyone. It's a real socialized environment because everything is shared the entire way. Consistency is key when it comes to any sort of DevOps, any sort of CI/CD pipeline. I want to have the same thing that I validated in QA go to production. I don't want to do a new build that might have a different commit in it and worry about that. And then our security-minded folks will really appreciate our last point here with only tools need access to production. The days of a developer coming in and copy pasting some files onto an IIS folder, those should be gone. I should need access to production as a developer because the tool will do it for me. And thus, it's a lot less risky and you don't have to open things up to your whole team. So that's kind of the conceptual stuff here. I think we're going to move into a practical right now, but first I want to check in. Mike, is there anything that you'd like to add to the concepts that we've thrown in here?
No, well, just a little bit. The concepts of that shift left and everything. Kelly and I have a boss, and he likes to say, just do everything earlier. He says it jokingly, but that's the shift left. And when you say shift left, it's really about the stuff that you're doing at the end of a process, just doing it earlier. Whether it's pushing stuff back into a dev, having test automation running after a build, making sure that the build and release pipelines are incorporating static code analysis for known security flaws, or even linting, making sure that everybody's following the syntax or the coding mechanism. So those kind of concepts, the earlier they're done, the better off they are. We're gonna, when we start getting into more of this, as you start seeing, there are three that's called the 3 ways from the book, The Phoenix Project. The Phoenix Project talks about those 3 ways, and it's really everything about. Yeah, it's a great book. It's really about 3 main principles of continuous, right? So one is continuous delivery, another one is continuous feedback, and then the other one is continuous experimentation and learning. And what we're going to demonstrate really is going to be about the continuous delivery phase of things. And then one of the things that Kelly had said on her last bullet point was a little, maybe it was the last bullet point, one of the bullet points was just like sharing everything out. But that sharing is used to solicit feedback. And that feedback of like the period that breaks something in production, the feedback loop, the shorter and smaller that feedback loop, the faster we can recover. And so that's a second way, right? And then, of course, as we move along with this, we start learning stuff and we are able to experiment. Like what we're doing today, we're doing some experimentation and we're getting feedback. We'll get feedback from Mark, we'll get feedback from you guys listening in. But really on the software side, when we deploy it, we're going to get feedback there. And you're gonna see how these concepts start tying into a very specific piece of software called Azure DevOps for that. Now, Kelly, I think you probably you're ready to go. So here you go.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just kind of reiterate. I'm a huge believer in Agile. I know that Mike is as well. We're both Scrum Masters, and this feeds into that whole concept, that continuous feedback. If I go and develop something for 6 months and develop the wrong thing, the old waterfall methodology, it's going to waste a lot of time and money, and DevOps can help you not do that. So I think it really goes hand in hand with a lot of those Agile concepts. So we mentioned the Phoenix Project book. We are going to be using a lot of their demos from here. This is something that you can do yourself as well. They have a team called Parts Unlimited. That's kind of the concept of the book, is this team is working through a transformation, and they have a Parts Unlimited website, and they're working to make it DevOpsy.
Yeah, if you just
not a word, but
yeah, sorry, Kelly. Just on that with the Parts Unlimited stuff, if you Google the Azure DevOps demo generator, it's in there, and then you can pull that up. Oh, there you go. You can pull that up, and then you can import the Parts Unlimited stuff into your stuff. Now, we've added to it, so you won't be able to do everything we're doing today out of the box. But this is our jumping off point for it. Sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
No, absolutely. It's a good call out because this is totally free, both Azure DevOps and all of this source. So you can generate an Azure DevOps organization. It's free for up to 5 users. You can just create one to play with and then delete. And you can get all of this sample code, all of this kind of start of automation and stuff like that so that you can play with it yourself with something real world. And that's the reason why we picked this is one, because, we're both fans of the Phoenix Project book, and I could even taught classes on it. And it's not just a hello world app. We want to show you something real so you can see what the actual application of this is, because that's when it starts to be, you kind of flip that little switch of, ooh, I'm doing this. Maybe I should make it better with that. It becomes a little bit more applicable to what you're doing on your day-to-day life. So as we go through this, we're going to have a little kind of scenario that we're walking through so you can see how this might play out in the real world. I'm going to be developer Kelly, put on my developer hat, and Mike is putting on his Captain Ops hat, and we'll be kind of taking on those roles as we work through this. So I'm a developer. I'm on the Parts Unlimited team, and we need to deploy our website. I have a website that I've written, and I need it to go somewhere. So let's look. I can show you. I've got source control right here. Got this whole website, and here you can see this is, for the most part, the source that downloading from that demo generator will help you have. We've edited a little bit, but you can see most of this. You can see it's a full-fledged website. There are tests. There are multiple areas to this. It's actually generating some data. There's a database and all behind it. So I have this site. I need to put it somewhere. I need to tell my customers that it's ready to go. I need to get it validated by my team. So I'm thinking, I'm going to go to my ops guy. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Kelly.
Can you give me somewhere to put my site?
Yeah. Let me think for a minute. Can you hold on? I'm going to. I got to go get you a space to do that. So you keep on talking, and let me go ahead and get. This is where my server folks like to get a little bit extra, as you'll see in a second, in their server rooms. This is where we make the use of our virtual technology here. So, Mike, have you walked to your server room yet? Yes. It's extremely cold here. So Kelly, I just want to let you know that first off, you didn't really give me much lead time to get you a server. So we really, in operations, require a 2-week lead time, and then obviously we have to order and provision the hardware. And when we do that, we'll rack it. We'll put the operating system on, make sure all the security patches are done, and a Windows patching is going to take a couple more hours. But we like to give it about a 2-day burn-in to make sure they're all good. So we're really looking about 3 to 4 weeks before I get you a server. Sorry.
Mike, you know that I do not have that kind of patience.
Well,
I'm a developer. I need it now.
Well,
is there something different we can do? Because I don't have 3 weeks. I need this site out this afternoon.
I've got all this space for servers here. I have a data center for a reason, Kelly. So I'm not sure.
It is not 1997.
No, and look, this has neon lights in it, and there's absolutely not I don't think they had neon lights in 1997. This is 2006.
Okay, yeah.
All right.
But it's 2020. There's got to be something better we can do.
Okay. Any suggestions?
So I've heard about this cloud thing.
Oh, you know what? We just started a project using Azure Cloud, and I think there's a couple of them. There's Azure Cloud, and there's AWS, and there's also Google Cloud. But we have Azure Cloud. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take a look at Azure Cloud. So if you could just bear with me a second. I'm going to go back to my office very, very quickly. So hold on, please.
I told you I need this now, so you better run.
Yes, I am running. Okay. So I tell you, that hat is pretty damn hot. So what we have here is on my site here, I'm in Microsoft Azure, and if you have never used Azure, I'm sorry. It is absolutely a fantastic way to do stuff. And what we have done is we're going to step you through a couple things, but basically you're renting somebody else's hardware. And so what Kelly needs is a website and a database. And the website is going to be running on a Windows server, and the database is going to be running on SQL Server. So we can create, now you see I only have a couple of resource groups, and a resource group in Azure is just a way to isolate a set of components so you can easily manage them. And so what we're going to do for Kelly is we're actually going to build out the pipelines is our thing, our the name of our company for Parts Unlimited. And we're going to build it in the dev environment in East US. So this just happens to be a naming convention that I'm using for right now. But we happen to have some, let's see if I can get some of this to show up here. So we have in here a few things that, like the Parts Unlimited app service, which is the website itself, an app service plan, which is, you can think of an app service plan in Azure as IIS, because it's basically what it does, and you have multiple apps running on it. We have a database running on a database server. And so everything here that Kelly needs for this app is running, and I'm not going to steal Kelly's thunder, so I'm going to just let her demo what's next on you. So yes, Kelly, I do have a place to put it. And well, before I do that, before I flip it back to you, we're going to build out our infrastructure using infrastructure as code. So we happen to have a repo, and I'm using Terraform for all my code building out, and our infrastructure is really just a way to define what the infrastructure is going to look like in a very simple to read thing. So I could give this to anybody, they can tell what's happening. I'm creating a resource group, an app service plan, an app service, SQL Server, and a database for it. And Terraform knows how to translate this into all the API calls into Azure. And I could write Terraform code for AWS and for Google Cloud or other providers. There's hundreds of providers. And this code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create these releases for the infrastructure. And you can see I have dev right here. So when I create this, it really goes through, and we'll get more into this in a moment, but it's going to go through and create a dev, a QA, and production environment for me in Azure. So right now, I've deployed out for Kelly to deploy onto her app. So Kelly, let me let you go ahead and show what they have for an app, and then from there you can talk about your site.
Awesome. So yeah, we jump ahead a few hours in time. My awesome ops guy has given me an Azure deployment. This is my dev site, so we're looking at this live. I'll refresh it. So my app has been published out there. And I'm like, okay, this is awesome. Oh, wait a minute. I've got a typo here. I put in some debug code because we've all left some of that. Hopefully no one has done something this egregious. But,
yeah, so how are you tracking that? Like, you found a bug. How are you going to track that, Kelly?
Yeah, well, hopefully, I found it before it even got to QA, but maybe one of my QA team members found it. So I'm going to use Azure DevOps for this as well, for tracking my work. So I've created a bug here. So I've got a misspelling on my homepage. The debug code is there. So I know, okay, this has been assigned to me. I need to fix this before we can go anywhere with it. So I want to work on this. Azure DevOps will allow you to integrate end-to-end. There are other tools that will do this. You can integrate Jira for your work items, but this is kind of one tool that will do them all, which is why this is my favorite, because I don't like having to go to multiple places if I don't want to. So I've got a bug for this. I want to work on it. Luckily, this is super easy. I've got this already open, and I'm just going to delete that debug code, right?
Yeah.
So
do you want to put that bug into your doing phase just so we can show also for that? Sorry.
Absolutely. So I'm working on this. So now someone knows that Kelly's got this. I'm actually working on it. It's a critical bug. If we were to go to production with this, that would be a showstopper. We wouldn't want anyone to see that. So I am working on that. I've made my code change. You can see I've already created a branch for this, but I'm going to go ahead and commit my changes here. Fix. All right. Okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'll put my work item number in here, and you'll see it'll auto associate. So this is 3774. So I'm going to go ahead and push this change out to my branch, right? So now I can go in here and look at my repo. First, look at this bug. Refresh this. It might take a second there. We'll go to the repo to look at that. So I need to do a pull request. I know that I am ready for this to go. It tells me, hey, you just recently updated this branch. Maybe you want to create a PR for this. So I'm going to do this.
Yeah, I really like that it put that link down below, 3774. That was great.
So because it will automatically look through some of these, you don't have to put them in your commit messages, but it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
So if you put that pound sign in front of it, it will automatically do this. I could also add some more work items here if I wanted to. I'm just going to leave this one already there. If I wanted to add some people who I want to review my PR, I can. So now I'm ready for someone to review this. You can see that it'll do some checks. You can have some cool things in here. So this will be on the scope of what we're talking about, but we can make it so that I had to execute a build successfully before my PR can be merged. I make it so that Mark has to approve my code or something like that. Now, I am going to do what no one should do and approve my own code, just so I can say, yes, Kelly, you did a great job. So now I'm ready for this actually to go somewhere. I want to see this somewhere beyond my local environment. So I'm going to complete this. I will just do a rebase. That is nice and easy. It will merge for me. And because of the way we have our pipeline set up, I can see that it has automatically kicked off a build. So I think, Mike, why don't you walk us through how the builds and deployments work here?
Yep, sure. So for the builds and deployments, we create what are called pipelines. And so you'll see I have this pipeline right here. We also have smoke tests too, which we're not going to get into. But these builds are just really a series of steps that the software is going to take to compile your code and do tests and everything else. So let's take a look at what these are. So we have the we get the sources, and it's been defined as an Azure repo. Tells us which branch we're going to do it off of by default. And then we have these phases. Now, phases are kind of interesting. There's a whole concept we can talk about phases and why they're very useful. But this has one phase, and basically it's going to go through and try to restore any NuGet packages. It's going to build the solution. It's also going to run any test assemblies that it finds. It's going to copy any files. Also, just so you know, this will publish those test results up in Azure DevOps. We'll take a look at that in a second. It's going to copy the files to a certain directory, so only the build output is going to be copied, and then it's going to publish this to the artifacts for that build. And that artifact, when it's finished, will be used later in the release. So we could let's go look at an old one that was built earlier by Kelly. We can see in here that we have one work item that's related to this build for what she did earlier. And we can look and see what item that is. That's again a failed build, which is not really a failed build, but it was. We have the artifact, and we can see that it's all the stuff that's going to be needed to be deployed out to her website. In addition, we can look at how we only have about 25% code coverage, and 88% are passing. It's kind of interesting. There are 16 tests. None failed, but there are 2 others. So we can always go and take a look at what those others are. So let's see if we can get a little bit more room in here and see what's going on here. We need others. And let's see what happens. So test shopping cart. Don't know why it wasn't run. But again, there's a whole lot of association that you can do with your, just from a code perspective, putting in what artifact or which work item you're working with, the branch that you've created, and everything else, and it will start telling us how we're doing from a code perspective. So this is very, very powerful on that build out portion of it. So let's see if we're finished with hers. It's finished. So another good thing, and I think I forgot to turn this back on, but we have automatic deployments. So let's go ahead and I'm going to edit this. And what this means is that we want to deploy it straight away to the dev environment whenever the master branch is built. Every single time, don't make haste. or make haste rather, and get this sucker going. I forgot to turn on this guy, so we'll just turn it on. But I'm going to kick off the release for this for dev. Now, a couple of things that are here on this is we happen to have this blue, and there's an approval waiting. I'm going to approve. This was an earlier one that we had done. I'll just approve it. I'll explain that in just a second. But I'm going to go ahead and create a new release, and it's going to pull off her 11.11 build today. And it's just our naming convention or our version information that we decide to use, but it can be however you want. There's a lot of options. So we'll create a release, and it's going to go through, and it's going to deploy to that environment, dev, QA, and production. So it's queued. It may take a second here. We're waiting for an agent to run the job. It's connecting. So agents are a way to connect to a Microsoft hosted build server. And what's really interesting about these build servers is they're just environments that are spun up on demand and then destroyed. So if you have any secrets that are downloaded or any special data, that all gets lost as soon as the build is complete, because it'll just go ahead and destroy everything.
And just to interject quickly, it's worth noting that if you are using this and you're not necessarily completely in the cloud, you can have on-premises agents.
Yeah, they're great.
So if your servers are located internally, it's pretty secure. It's just it's a pull, not a push. So it's on 443. Your agent can be there, and you can have any sort of internal stuff that you want.
Yeah, and so we just deployed out to dev. So I'm going to hand it back over to Kelly real quick. Mm-hmm. And so Kelly, why don't you? So this is where we're at. Is that go ahead, Kelly.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to refresh my page right away. I want to see that my bug has been fixed, so that I can say I'm ready to go to the next stage. I've done all my validation. It's going to take a second to warm up on the site here. We're on the free tier of everything, or the lower tiers. So this might take a second, and this will allow me to just kind of instantaneously validate and say I'm ready to move on to QA or even to production, and we can just have those approvals that we go. Kind of what Mike was hinting at a second ago, that I'm going to actually look at this, and then I can say, okay, this looks good. I'm ready for someone to approve this, and that leads right back into Mike.
Yeah, so Kelly, one thing I haven't done yet is I don't have QA and production built out yet.
I figured you would have just done that immediately when I asked for dev. Don't you just assume that I want QA and production?
That's typically not how it is. For some reason, operations, you got to tell me exactly what you want. Did you want?
You got to be able to read my mind.
You wanted a QA. Okay. All right. So let's.
Yeah, I kind of need a QA.
All right. So let's just take a look at how we're going to get these environments built. So we had talked a little bit about, half of this talk is about what's called app configuration. And one thing that I have found really useful in Azure DevOps, if you've ever used it, there's this really great feature called the library. And this library is a good spot to create these groups of variables that you can use during your release and your deployment, your builds and your deployments. And you can use it for all kinds of reasons in those deployments. But what I've really found really frustrating is when I create a variable group. I may create a dev variable group, for instance, and I may have a bunch of variables like let's say app insights key. Whoops. And for that, I may have a value, whatever the number is for it. And I may have several different variables that I'm going to use for my dev environment. And then, of course, if I need to do QA, I got to create another variable group. And so I'll just create a QA var group. And again, I have to put in that key. What was it? App ID instrumentation key. Okay, and I'd put in that value also. So, and then I save it. Now, there's obviously a problem that you guys probably caught up on, and you weren't going to say anything. I appreciate that. Daniel's on. Daniel would have pointed that out to me. I know that already. But
yeah, definitely.
So I have these two groups, and I've done two things. One is I have these two totally different naming conventions, which kind of sucks here. I'm not consistent, and I have different variable names for basically the same thing. So while I find the library fascinating and absolutely an awesome thing, I also find it to be a real pain in the ass. And this is just from a lot of experience with a couple of clients where we've built out these library groups. They're very, very powerful, but they're really hard to maintain and update. So Azure has built out something called the app configuration. And so what we're going to show you is a couple things in app configuration, and it's just another resource type in Azure. And the app configuration, we're going to set it up a little bit differently. And I'm using a free tier. Free tiers have a limit on how many requests you can make to it per day. The free tier is 1,000, so you've got to either be very, very cautious on how you do your polls and cache a lot of stuff, or go up to the basic tier, which gives you something like 10,000 requests per day, and then you do it. But we're going to be looking at this configuration explorer. And so I have all these infrastructure variables that I'm going to use here for my application. And you'll also notice I have these little keys right here, these configuration connection strings. These point back to Key Vault, where I have secure data that I don't want easily viewed. So if I hit view values on all of these, you can see I can expose them, but for those that are locked, it's just a reference over to the keys that I'm using in Key Vault. But what's really nice here, it gives it a standardized naming convention for that. So let's expand all these, and we can just take a look at all these different values. So Kelly said we're using all the free stuff. That's not really quite true. I've actually kind of done some basic because it's very low use, and I have $150 credit every month. So me spinning up and spending a little bit of money for these demos doesn't really matter. So, but you can see that
these are the things we do for you guys.
That's right, because you guys are awesome to watch. I appreciate it. So you can see we have like the app service plan SKU size. So we're using a basic B1 for dev. That may be why it's slow, but when we get into production, we're doing a B3, and for QA a B3. So but you'll notice the name of the variable is now, it's one variable name, and I'm adding what are called labels, and these labels, I just kind of use them as what environment am I building for, so dev, production, QA, or am I pulling information down for? And we'll get into like the feature stuff later. So I want to build out a QA environment, and you can see that if I just pull back all of the stuff for QA, all of the values I need for QA, I know that I'm going to have a B3 and a one capacity basic general purpose database. It's going to be a GP5 with 4 processors on it. What's really nice about these, if you have never used the general purpose database, you can actually configure these things to be on demand, where they kind of shut down of 2 hours of inactivity, which is great for QA and dev environments because they shut off. But they're very powerful machines, so when you start working on them, they spin back up, they turn on, and then they do their stuff. And then after an hour or 2 hours, however you configure it for shutdown, they'll just stop and they deprovision the database resources for you without losing your database, of course. I'm going to deploy to East US. Here's my admin username for this. My password, again, is coming from Key Vault, so you don't know what it is. And I have an App Insights instrumentation key, which I'm going to inject into our app configuration on the app service itself. But we won't be doing this. We don't have App Insights enabled. I didn't bother putting it in there. And it's going to create a resource group called RG Pipelines QA. So let's just take a look at this pipeline. And this is a release pipeline pulling straight from the IAC code, which is my infrastructure as code I showed you a second ago. And I have this build environment. So I've already deployed out to dev, but you know what? Dang it, we need one for QA. So we're going to go ahead and deploy this out for QA. And it's waiting for me to approve this. If I could have a little, I need to, I actually have an older version that I need to kind of like not to see that one. Let's see what's going on here. I have something waiting, and I got to find out why this one does not want to deploy. Let me just, I have to redeploy it. Okay, so I'm going to deploy this guy out, and it's queued. Also, you get one build agent, which, it's okay, but if you're trying to do a demo, you can only do one build at a time, one build or release at a time, and sometimes these can take a minute or two. So this is going to go through. Now, I've really streamlined what I need to do. So while this is doing this, I want to talk a little bit about the release pipelines and why these app configs are really powerful. So one is I can reduce the number of variables that I have to pass by allowing my build to figure out which variables to use. So let's just, while this is going, let's go ahead and edit this pipeline. I'll show you what I mean. So I have in here this one task called Deploy Parts Unlimited QA Environment. This task happens to be a task group. Now, I am passing some variables in here. And if we look at the variables I'm passing, I just said, I didn't need to use the library, but I do need to use some variables. And what I'm doing is I have to use them because the system needs a place to put those variables when it pulls them down. So, and the task group that I'm using needs these to be set so it knows what to use. So while you don't have a lot of variables and values in here, you have no values, they're all getting there. But take a look at this guy in particular, and then this guy right down here. And I'll show you why this is really important. So the environment, I'm just going to cheat, right? So before I showed you, we have these QA, this label QA. So I want to pull all the QA stuff down. So what I do is I use this variable called release.environmentName, which is a built-in variable for Azure DevOps. So if I just name this guy QA, it'll look at that and say, hey, you know what? I'll go get all the QA stuff. So if I were to create a new environment, which I could do, I could just clone this and then change the name to like staging and then add all the values for staging, and I'm done. I don't have to do anything else. So if I look at the task group for that deploy the environment, you can see there's a lot that's going on behind the scenes, like download the app configuration variables, and it needs to know which environment. And again, it gets it from the name that I called that environment. So I don't have to do a lot here. I have to do some token replacement to make sure those variables inject into my Terraform files. I run through Terraform, initializing it, planning, approving it, outputting it, and then I'm going to stick something into a setting for Kelly's application. I'm actually going to put in a few things like, hey, what's the instrumentation key? And these are ones that aren't going to change during deployments of the software. Now, we can absolutely, in the application deployment, add even more if we needed to. And then I, of course, have which connection string to the database. But what's really kind of neat here is it's doing that through a whole bunch of variables, so I don't have any secrets exposed. And then when the thing runs, it's going to build up this value for the default connection string and it adds it into Azure's default connection string. So a lot going on, but I've really extrapolated a lot of problem. Is that the right? No. Obfuscated a lot of the problems for anybody that wants to continue on. So if we needed to deploy a new environment, we could. So let's see where we're at here on this guy. So we'll go back into our pipelines and we'll go into the releases. And let's see if QA is finished. Let's see here. Was it this guy? Oh, I must have deployed an older version, but it's okay. This is approval pending.
That's the site. You want the infrastructure.
Oopsie. You know what's going to happen now? It's going to deploy to nothing. So we may have to deploy it. So it is running, finalizing. So actually, we just beat it.
Perfect timing.
Oh, I clicked the wrong thing. This is why you have approvals in your steps, and you have other people approve things, not one person approve everything. So now that it's deployed, I could go and check it out, make sure it's all right. And so we'll go take a look, refresh our resource group here, and there it is, our pipeline for QA East. And you'll see that I have the app service plan, all named the same exact way I want it to be. And if I look at the app service, and we just take a look now, the app hasn't been, it's being deployed as we talk, but we have all these variables that have been set up for the application during that infrastructure build out. So very, very powerful. And now Kelly wanted to deploy this out to QA, which,
Please.
yep. So if we look at the build releases, we can take a look at the app. It's building an old version. So you know what we're going to do, Kelly? We're going to kill this guy. We're just not going to do it. We're not going to deploy an old version of the app. So it's going to cancel that guy.
You can be the victim there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead to the dev, approve the dev. So why are we approving dev after it's been deployed? It's kind of a way to prevent QA from getting the software before the dev team feels it's ready for them to get it. So if QA doesn't have access to approve something to deploy, they can't approve, well, you can set it, but they wouldn't approve the dev post approval. So when the development team says, hey, I feel comfortable with this, then they would hit approve, and then QA would then be able to approve the deployment to their environment. So having a multi-stage approval process is really good. So this is a pre-deployment approval. QA wants to test this out. So they're going to...
What this really buys you that's great, sorry to kind of interject
Absolutely.
there, Mike, is the idea that teams can own their own environments. The dev team owns the dev environment. The QA team owns the QA environment. So they can have that control and decide what they want to see when, and when something comes out of their environment as well as what comes in. So you're really giving that team the authority and the responsibility there that says, this is your environment, be good with it.
Yep, exactly right, exactly. So this is going to take a second to deploy out her latest changes. What we are not going to do, we're not going to go ahead and build the production. We can build all of them all the way out for this. But look, it's deployed. So Kelly, if you want, why don't you go ahead and refresh your screen?
I am refreshing it now. I refreshed when we had the canceled build, so that didn't really work there. But now I can validate that QA is going to see what I want them to see. And while we're waiting for that to refresh, I will note that as Mike was talking about all of those app settings that he can have, if I'm looking here at, we're using .NET Framework, but the idea of having to do your XML transformations or storing any kind of real information inside of your .configs or your app settings JSONs, you don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to make any changes on the code side for what he showed to work. During deployment, it will just pull from that app configuration inside of Azure and say, okay, we're going to set the administrator username to this, so that your developers never have to worry about that. You don't have to commit production passwords to your source control. It's all stored inside of Azure without impacting your developers at all. So now I'm on QA, and my site is out there. It's ready for QA to take it on.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So next, we're going to go with something a little bit deeper, right? I'm going to look at my boards and see what I've got to work on. So I see I've got a feature request from the business, and they say, okay, we want to add a carousel to the homepage. We want to display some information about some sales we've got coming up. So, okay, I'm going to start working on that one. And actually, I kind of knew this was coming, so I've been working on it in secret in the back end.
Yeah, so Kelly, hey, look, I hope you haven't done a lot of work. We can handle that on the operations side, where you don't have to put in any code that has anything hard-coded. How does that sound?
Okay, yeah, of whether I wanted to turn something on or off.
That's right, yeah. So
yeah, I've been working on it, and I've just kind of been hiding things so that no one really knew it was there.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I could make it so that operations could turn it on, that would be cool.
Yeah, so that's going to go back into into our thing. But what do you want this this carousel to be named?
It's kind of my hero carousel. So maybe we have some sort of flag telling me whether or not I should show the hero. So
okay.
Show hero.
Yeah. Okay. So let me show you how we're going to set that up. Well, and then or do you want to go ahead and show your code first, and then we'll.
Yeah. Let's show how we're doing this.
Okay.
So I've got on my homepage, I've been working on this. See, I've already got the code there, but I mostly just kind of turned it off. So I had something in my model, and then when I load this up, I just say, don't show this. So that way I could be working on it and pushing it and not worry about it breaking anything. I've just got it all hidden on the page. But now I'm thinking, maybe there's a better way to handle this so that I don't have to do a new code deployment when I want to turn this on and off. I think that's where, Mike, you might be really able to help me.
Oh, yeah, sure. So what we have in Azure is we have a way, and I don't believe I closed my tab on it. We have this thing in the app configuration, as a matter of fact, is a tool or a feature called feature management. And so feature management, we have this show hero. So I've already added it for Kelly, and I've given it a very specific label. Just so you know, when you do these labels and everything, if you do dev, whatever calls you make will get every feature and application configuration from the Config Explorer. So we kind of ran into some problems, but we name these very specific. So when Kelly is looking for features, she will preface everything with the word feature and then the environment. Keeps everything really kind of clean for her. But right now we have the show hero for dev, production, and QA set up for her to use. So when once she's deployed her code, she can deploy it safely, and there's not anything else she's got to do. But when she's ready, we can actually turn the show hero on or off. So Kelly, I'll let you go ahead and do your thing. So back to you.
Absolutely. And this may be familiar to some of you at a code level if you've worked with some of the .NET feature management before. The feature management concept has been there for a little while, introduced, I think, in Core, where you could set that through your app settings, that you could turn feature flags on and off and retrieve them through the feature manager. And now it's moved to Azure, so that, again, you don't have to be changing your app settings.
Yeah, and that's really good about that is if you do store those features in your app config, right, or in the app config in the application in Azure, the problem is every time you change it, you get a recycle. And so if you have a recycle on that app when somebody's using it, that's not exactly a good thing. But by having this, it's a toggle switch. It does not cause any recycle to the app.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So it makes it a lot easier to work with there. So I'm going to need to do a couple things here to enable this. First, I'm going to have to make some changes to my config so that I can access this endpoint. So we're using this, and these can be named anything. This is just what we decided to do. So we said our hosting environment, and we called it dev. So this is what I've got for my local. So I know that I am working with this one, and this is going to help me retrieve that by that label. Show that feature dev. So I'll know that in different environments, I can pull different versions of this feature flag so that I might be able to have it on in dev, but off in production, and work through that. Then here's the really critical part. You want to be able to connect to that store. So as part of that configuration, I need to know what it looks like. So it'll provide you with a read-only key here that says you can access this store. So this is the one that we have configured inside as part of our configuration inside of Azure.
Yeah, but you could, again, back to what we had said earlier, is you could have like your dev one there, and then when this gets, when we deploy the infrastructure or even the app, we can then update the app settings and the configuration on the Azure side, so you wouldn't even know what that secret is or anything else here.
Yep, I could set up my own Azure endpoint to work with, just to fudge with as I play, as I'm waiting on my guy to get back from his server room and actually do something for me. And then, as you said, this can change for every environment. I'm obviously going to switch this one to QA when I get pushed to QA, and that we have just inside of our configuration manager. So now to actually connect to that service, don't do it the way I'm showing you exactly right now. We're doing this to make it a little bit easier for demo. So we are connecting every time you load the homepage. So we should probably inject it and all of that, but just to kind of show you some of the basics of how this works. So you'll take something from your configuration builder, and then it's as simple as add Azure app configuration. There's a method here that just tells it, okay, I want to connect using that endpoint. So that's that variable that we had in our web config. And now here's how I'm going to determine what environment variable or what environment label I'm going to use. So first, I want to make sure that if I don't have something that's specific to dev, I'll just take whatever. So that if there is no label on it, that's kind of what I fall back on. And then I want to override that with anything that I have from dev. So you can see I've taken that hosting environment from my web config and said, give me anything that has the label feature, dev in this case. We're saying we're using feature flags. So this just turns it on. And then it said, give me the feature manager service. Just some kind of boilerplate code here that you'll use. And then ideally you would inject this so that you can use it in all of your controllers and not constantly reinstantiate it. So now that I have my feature manager, I actually need to access it, right? So I want to check, is Hero enabled? And you can see what I've done here is, as Meg mentioned, we're kind of on that free tier. And I don't need to check that configuration every single time necessarily. So I might want to cache that. I might want to check every 10 minutes to see if it's there. We've actually commented out adding it to memory just so we can show you real quick, flipping it on and off. But this way you can not have to check every time this page is loaded to see if a feature is enabled. You can assume that it might be similar for some time. So when I'm actually looking at whether or not this is enabled, it's as simple as saying, is this enabled? So it will check for that show hero feature. It will say, do you have anything? Or first say, do you have one with the dev label, that feature dev label? And then if not, give me something that doesn't have any label. So it would never pull the feature QA. It would just pull something that doesn't have a label. If it's enabled, then say true. And if it's not enabled, say false. And one nice thing is if that feature wasn't there at all, so if we never defined show hero inside of our feature manager in Azure, then it would just default to false. So this doesn't say, get the feature, is it true or false? It just says, is it enabled? So if it's not present, then it's not enabled. So we're going to run this, and you'll see, if you remember on Mike's screen there, it was off. So when you create one, by default, it's going to be turned off.
Yeah, so
let this run.
So Kelly, just there was a quick question while it's running from Dan Wolf. What's your opinion on updating web config file in production web app for a break fix? For example, oops, we forgot to change a URL path for a report. Our operator can make a quick fix of web config in less than a minute, or we can run through our monolithic web app through our sophisticated CI/CD build deploy pipeline, which may take multiple people and many minutes to coordinate. So that's a really interesting question. One is, it's actually pretty easy to have things going through CI/CD and go straight to production. I understand the having less than 1 minute to make a change. And if you got to do it, you got to do it. If your website is down, first and foremost, get the website up. But that should have been something. Hopefully, it would have been something that if I forgot to change a URL path and it's not breaking the website, by all means, it's much better to go through the process because it's audited, right? It's an auditable event that happens inside the entire system. And as soon as you go outside of that system, you actually inject risk. And that would be, so let's say you did put in, I want to add that new URL. But one of the things that you did is you put in the wrong kind of slashes or something inside of it. Or you didn't terminate something correctly and you updated that web config and now it brings the site down instead of not having a correct URL. So it all depends on context, of course. But I would be very careful on going outside of a process because there are ways in the process to bypass other things. And also, if you have, it's somebody else like Yasif, he says, hey, look, if I have 1,000 servers too. So, and that is actually a very valid point. And you can think back to a $480 million mistake that Knight Capital Investment Group made by forgetting one server by doing that very thing. So one server running an old version of software caused them $480 million in 45 minutes. So if you only have one server, go for it. But if it's business critical, you'd probably be best off going through the CI/CD process. There are ways to skip dev and QA and just build off of a branch that has that fix. And I've run into the same problem in production with my clients, and we can still turn that around extremely fast, even if it is a less than 1 minute thing. So it's not about the time, it's really about the how do we get that process to be fast and make sure it's auditable, and if we make a mistake, we can revert quickly. Sorry, Dan, I'm long-winded, so.
You get used to Mike after a while, but I'm long-winded too. So, all right. So I am running my local version of my site here, just to jump back. And you see, I don't have any, this is the same thing that we saw before. So even though I have that code in there, that feature flag isn't enabled. So I'm going to say, hey, Mike, I think I'm ready to test this. Can you enable that flag?
Yeah, so it's enabled. Go ahead and refresh your page.
And then right away.
Yeah.
I didn't have to change anything in my code. It just instantaneously, now it's available. You can see that we are super on time here with our Christmas sale.
Yep.
So Christmas in July. You guys can.
So I do have, and this is just the flag. So all I did was click on, and it allowed it to turn on. Now I'm just going to turn it off. And Kelly, would you refresh your page again? So I just turned it off because maybe there's something we don't like about it. So boom, it's gone. So it's that fast and that easy to use that feature flag.
And now part of that is because we didn't cache it, of course. So if you had it cached, you'd have to wait or clear your cache. But so that's some good, valuable information there.
Yep.
So, all right. So that's good stuff. Let's talk, how can we take this even further? So on-off is great. But what if, so I've got this feature, I'm thinking about using some, intelligence, some artificial intelligence to make recommendations for people. But it works oddly in different browsers. So I'm really only confident that it's going to work in Chrome. So that feature flag concept, Mike, do you think there's something that we can do to be a little bit more granular than just on-off?
Of course there is, Kelly. So again, the feature flags are not just on-off, yes, no, but we can have conditional. So you had told me earlier you wanted one for recommendations. So we created the one for recommendations for dev. And what that is a little bit more advanced, right? So I'm going to put it back to conditional, and we have this filter called browser. And so if you are a browser of Chrome, type Chrome, then you're going to see this new functionality piece. And there's a lot of different things. Now this one, Kelly said she wanted to have allowed browsers. This is not out of the box. Browser is not a thing, but we can do, there are two, which is percentage, like percentage of hits to the server, so it can turn things on and off, and then also time period. So with that carousel, maybe we want to have it showing only during Christmas time, so we can actually do a period thing for that to show up. And those are kind of built in, so you don't have to write any custom code for that to use that new feature. So I don't think I have to do anything here. I'm not going to make any changes, but I am just going to enable the conditional flag while Kelly goes ahead and shows you how to implement that.
So like Mike mentioned, we went a little custom here because, for me, I'm always thinking what works in Chrome versus IE versus Firefox and what's going to be best here. So when I am looking at recommendations on a product, I want to say, is that enabled? So here, again, don't do this because I didn't inject things. So we're looking at the same configuration. This is just copy paste from that home controller. So I have that recommendations. Is that one enabled? And it kind of looks very similar. You're like, okay, well, how does that take into account what browser I am? So here is one thing that is slightly different. So I have here added a feature filter. So I have written a custom filter called browser filter, and don't be afraid when I say custom, it's really not that much code, and it's pretty simple to do. So if I look at this filter, you're going to see I've defined, Chrome, Firefox, IE, though of note is that Edge identifies itself as Chrome. And I've just said, okay, I want to get this over, or implements an iFeature filter that exists from the framework. And I'm saying, okay, get the parameters from my feature filter evaluation context. So I'm overriding this evaluate, or implementing this evaluate async. So this will tell me when I look at this and execute this, what parameters have been defined for that feature flag. So I know that allowed browsers is going to come through, and I'm going to look and say, okay, if it's Chrome and I am in Chrome, then yep, return true. If not, return false. So now that I know he's enabled that, I'm looking at this. This is Chrome, and I don't have recommendations. You'll see what those look like in a second as soon as I refresh. And there you go. Now I've got some recommendations. You might want to consider these, but now let's make sure it really works. And need to fix our images there. But I've got Firefox open. Put it side by side there. And I'm going to look at that same page, and I don't have any recommendations. So you know what? This doesn't look great in Chrome. Mike, can you turn that off for me? I don't think it's ready to go yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's turned off. So while you're
gone.
So I just want to. There was another question from Joseph, and I apologize if I'm saying Joseph and it's Yosef, but I think it's Joseph. So apologies. The feature flag is intended strictly for DevOps process, could be used for production services subscription. So great question. I stole it. It's not a DevOps thing, right? It is something I found that would make my job easier in DevOps, so I decided to use it. But think about, we said earlier, if I have these different flags and everything inside of my app config and I want to make a change, what do I have to do? I have to go and I'll end up recycling the service. So if I had all of these all of my settings, every setting except for maybe one if I need it, if I had them all inside of my app configuration, would I ever I would never have to worry about a recycle. I can just go change the value in the app configuration, the Azure app configuration, and then the next time the page is refreshed, that value is reflected in there. Whether it's like, hey, I need to use a different app insights key, or I want to turn on a feature, or my connection string might be a different one, but any of those app settings are definitely something that you can now just use for that product and service, right? So I've adapted it. So we have two use cases that we're doing in this demo. One is for the DevOps, and the other one is for the application product. So I decided I wanted to do everything in Configuration Explorer, but I now have Kelly is using the feature manager for her application. So look, it's there. It's a feature, right? So let me pose it a little bit different for you. Is SQL Server a DevOps tool or is it an applications tool? To me, DevOps could certainly use SQL Server if it needed to store stuff during the SQL or during the DevOps process. I just happen to have a tool, and that's what I decided to use. And I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and just to kind of build on that, this feature, it is something that already existed in .NET Core and Framework. It is easier to use in Core, so if you want to do this, I highly recommend that you already be in Core, if you aren't already. And you can do this inside of just your app settings. You can say which features are enabled and for what purposes. This just moves that into Azure specifically so that you can maintain it somewhere else. You can maintain it as part of your DevOps process. I don't have to have operations going in and changing my config. They can just set it there inside of Azure itself. And again, that recycling that Mike mentions, it just happens instantaneously so that users will get this. And you'll see this kind of feature flag. It really is critical to CI/CD. Because if I'm doing continuous deployment, if I'm deploying to production every day, or even say every 2 weeks, I'm deploying whatever my latest code is to production, but I have a feature that takes longer to develop than that. Say I'm implementing a whole new way of shopping where it's just gonna magically know what you need and have a subscription service. That might take me more than 2 weeks to develop, but I don't wanna have a branch of code that's lingering out there, getting further and further behind master for a month. I want to go ahead and deploy that and just not turn on my subscription service. And this makes that a lot easier to do, so that code is out there in production, just no one sees it.
Yeah.
And then as soon as it's ready, I can go to operations and say, we're ready to turn on that subscription service, and no one has to deploy code. You just have to click on.
Yeah, so another one was, my thought on this is, yes, it could be used to enable, disable UI elements based on user subscription, but it likely should not be used as a replacement for checking roles, authorizations at an API level. Absolutely. This is not for that. I mean, you could probably bake something in there, but I definitely agree with you on that, John, this is not a replacement for checking for security. It is a way to have a feature that you can enable conditionally or enable at a part-time, just through Christmas time, or you want to test it out, see how it looks and see how it performs and gather metrics on it, and then turn it off. And believe it or not, this is definitely nothing new. Facebook does a lot of, and you could turn some of these features on hidden, right? So not only do you have the feature running, but like what Facebook does is they have features at launch, but they're invisible. And as we interact with the system, they're gathering metrics whether or not that feature will work and be good. So you could do something similar. This can be very complex. You can nest your conditions if you wanted to. You can have features turn on and off. We could have the show recommendations turned on and have the conditions then determine, or we could just turn off recommendations completely by just saying, I don't want them to show, but still have some of the conditional logic there for something else. So a lot of different ways you can slice and dice this stuff. So I don't know, Kelly, is there anything else that we need to cover?
No, I think we've got our app going end to end. I think we've got a big success here. So yeah, I think there's questions from the crowd at this point.
Yeah, and since she's not going to need my help anymore, I've left the building. I am going to sit out at the beach. But any questions anybody has, we'll be more than happy to answer for people. I'll go back to my office.
See if I can see the chat here.
Let's see. Question.
Feel free to speak up at this point. You can unmute yourself and talk.
Yeah. A question from Don is probably a presentation unto itself, but on the source management aspect of Azure DevOps, do you have a favorite branching strategy for developers? Personally, I really like Git flow. Some people really love GitHub flow. There are a lot of different opinions on this. At the end of the day, my opinion is do what the team really is comfortable with, and that can be documented and a process can be followed. And the idea and spirit of Agile and Scrum is if you don't like it, make a change. So at the end of a sprint, you have a retrospective. And that's a perfect time to say, I really hate how we do our branching. And if everybody's in agreement, make a change on how your branching strategy should be.
I will say that I've recently been looking at the release flow, which is Microsoft's kind of modified version of Git flow. And I'm a big fan of it. It might be my newest one that's like a great middle ground for, because Git flow can be really complicated. It's a lot of perhaps moving branches and things. And I think that release flow can be a great middle ground there. So I'm a fan of that one. But as Mike said, the critical thing is to pick a strategy and try it. And if it doesn't work, change it. But whatever you do, be consistent about it. And when you change, be consistent with that change. So if everyone's doing what they want all willy-nilly, that's when things are going to fall apart. So if you say, this week we're going to use Git flow, then you use Git flow. And if you say, that didn't work for us, then the whole team changes to whatever new strategy you pick.
Yeah. Probably
don't want to change on a weekly basis, but there's some options there.
Yeah, and just remember, like the third way is experimentation. So, next year there's going to be some new branching strategy that's going to come out. It's going to be all the rage of everything. Give it a shot and see if you like it. I've never actually heard of the Microsoft Flow. I have to check that one out, Kelly. So I'm going to...
Release flow, yeah. They use it. The Azure DevOps team themselves use it.
Oh, yeah.
Various teams within their organizations use different models.
Yeah, so again, stuff like that, the whole idea is to be able to cycle faster. And the way to cycle faster is having the entire team buying in to the process that you do. So whereas I have found in my personal experience, stuff like PMP type projects where it's all waterfall and you got to do this and you have, a 1,500 100-page document of your SDLC, and you're supposed to know every last thing. I adopt the principle of Scrum, really small, easy changes. Everybody's on board. You don't have a 1,000-page document you got to read before you start on your first week at the job. It's very well documented on how all these flows work on the internet. So I'm opposed to creating your own, because unless you are a company or individual that focuses on process optimization and you sell that, or you make those kind of things and you publish them, your core goal should be getting software and the value that that software has delivered to your customer, whether it's internal or external, as quickly as possible. When your code sits on the shelf because you're determining whether or not you should use Git flow or release flow or the new flow of the week, you're wasting that value of that software because you can't figure out how to get it to the customer. So that's my skill. I don't care which flow you use. Stick with one that works for you and your team, and then experiment with new ways and faster ways that make it easy for you guys. And that should not just be with flows, right? That's like on all of like what I was doing with the releases and everything. I have experimented on how can I make my pipelines faster, or creating a new environment faster, and I came across using the app configuration. And for me, having that app configuration has literally saved me days of work for using that library inside of Azure DevOps. But not every customer is going to be using Azure. So, you know, I think Dan had one. Dan Brown, if you don't mind telling, what was that that AWS has that's similar?
To Azure DevOps?
No, to the, I'm sorry, to the app configuration stuff. You
have something called Parameter Store that's in the system manager, and you can store even secret and encrypted passwords in there.
Oh, good. So you know, again, it comes down to like, how can I? And if my customer was on AWS, I probably would use something like that to be able to do it. The point being is whatever your team needs to operate faster, get those cycle times smaller, and get the feedback from your customer or from your QA or from your other developers faster is going to deliver the value faster. And that's really what it comes down to.
Question. In fact, also to the idea of self-organizing teams.
Yep.
Your team decides what works best for you. So if your team decides that they want to do X, Y, Z, then the team tries X, Y, Z. And if it fails, it fails. Because then they'll do better next time and they'll pick ABC as they should have the first time.
That's right.
I got one more question, Joseph, here. So this may not be related to like specifically to DevOps, but goes in line with what you were just saying. So when it comes to, say, for example, you're selecting a service like a CI/CD service. So now GitHub, which is used by millions of projects out there, is owned by Microsoft, and DevOps owned by Microsoft. I was recently actually surprised that a preview service they released recently, Microsoft released recently, Azure Static Apps. They released it only works with GitHub. So I was surprised that they chose GitHub to release a preview rather than DevOps. So just wanted to ask, where do you see Microsoft going with these two competing products?
So GitHub, you're right. Microsoft bought GitHub 2 years ago now, or a year ago. And they've kind of kept it very open source focused, right? So the idea being is that's much broader. It's easier to find stuff. Azure DevOps, on the other hand, is really targeted. They're getting where you can have public projects, but theirs has always been traditionally, from a TFS standpoint, an on-prem, enterprise-focused, closed environment for people. And I think what they're trying to do is, so if you think about like GitHub, and this is an opinion, you think about GitHub, there's not Azure or AWS or Google Cloud or anything else like Cloud9 or any other provider that kind of is associated with it, right? So it's GitHub, and it's been very open source, very popular. for a long time. And so I think Microsoft wants to capitalize on that. And by having where almost everybody is, by having them there and being able to deploy the static apps, and they do, all it is cloud storage at the back end being served up through HTTPS anyway, or HTTP. That's a great win. So Azure DevOps though, but there's so much functionality in that for teams versus, hey, I want to host my site. So
I think to me that's the biggest difference between GitHub and Azure DevOps is, they have some similar things, but GitHub is for open source. That's what GitHub is for. That's its strength and what it's best used for. Azure DevOps is best for teams.
Yep.
When I am working on something as an organization versus the whole world working on it.
Yeah. And you can have, so just like you can have public projects inside of Azure DevOps, you can have private projects in GitHub, but again, it's
not the strength.
It's not the strength.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any gotchas between using Azure DevOps for deploying software versus Azure DevOps for deploying? Are there any gotchas? So, look, deploying infrastructure, there's a lot of gotchas. You've got to know how that infrastructure has to be set up. It's not that it's hard. There's just a lot of pieces for it. You take like Terraform, for instance. The first time I jumped into Terraform for infrastructure as code, I was confused as all get out. And it took me forever to figure out what is a provider and how does that tie in with what Terraform is and what version is this, what version is that, how does this work? Took me a lot of time just to kind of get my hands around it because I had been using all of the Azure ARM templates. And if you compare ARM templates with the Azure or with Terraform files, it's night and day. You can open up a Terraform file and it's kind of in YAML format. You look at the ARM template, it's a whole bunch of mess. It works.
They don't feel made to be edited.
So, but deploying that infrastructure, the gotchas are, one is you have to make sure you have the right rights for the build service to go out there and push stuff. And what I've run into with trying to insert records into Key Vault on infrastructure builds or into the app configuration service is then you have to start dealing with new set of RBAC permissions, right? So it's not that Azure, the build service on ADOps or ADO or Azure DevOps, whichever one you like to say, that service typically has a lot of access into Azure when you create a service connection. But the problem that you find out when you start getting into these more secure settings like Key Vault, you have to go in and actually add additional settings for there. And that is like, oh, well, I didn't know how to do that at first, right? So, but now it's like, yeah, it's no problem. Of course that makes sense. So those aren't really gotchas. It's a release, right? You're releasing software to something, and that something happens to be the Azure cloud, and then you're releasing that infrastructure. And what it comes down to, it's just code. It's just code at the end of the day. And Kelly kind of cracked me up. She said she just heard this the other day, and I've been hearing this for a long time because I have an operations background as well. It was we should treat infrastructure as a forest, not as a pet. So anytime we need new infrastructure, we just spin it up. And I don't care the names of anything really, unless I need a name. I don't know what server names any of my stuff is really running on. I just name my application. It's running on some server, probably server 4,000,006 in some data center in, I think Virginia or something. So I don't care, right? And that's the way we should treat our infrastructure, is just treat it as code and not worry about, oh, I love my server, I'm going to name it the Super Server 1. Yes, Don, thank you. I love to be poetic in my discussions.
For me, I'll just say that in general, the biggest gotcha when it comes to Azure DevOps is that this whole world is constantly changing.
Yeah.
There is a release to ADOPS, which is my favorite way of saying it, every 3 weeks.
Every 3 weeks.
There are new features every 3 weeks. sometimes that may mean that something you had as a way of doing something, now you can do another way. And you can end up getting yourself really tangled and really confused. So sometimes you just gotta, step back and look at it and look at the new features. You gotta stay on top of things. You gotta be reading those release notes every 3 weeks if you're really hardcore using it, because something that you may have had to spaghetti before may now be a single button click.
Yeah, and and I just pulled that up. One thing, and they're very proud of this, 171 continuous sprints. I mean, about 3 years ago, I remember when they started advertising how many continuous sprints they've been on. It was like on 50 or something like that. But what's really nice is they put those release notes front and center on their homepage of ADOPS. See, you got me saying it, and I hate that word, actually.
It's great.
So they put it front and center, and you just, obviously just click in and you can see what new releases they have. There's so much here. I have my clients tell me what's in the product sometimes, and I almost feel like a fool because I should know this, right? I'm the expert. But, they happen to read a release note that I hadn't read yet, and they're like, hey, can we do this? I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, but it says you can. I'm like, I guess you can do it. Let's try it.
And to your point down there, it isn't necessarily hard to set up, because for really basic uses, it's incredibly easy to set up.
Yeah.
It will do a lot of these templates for you out of the box. If I want to just build a site and deploy it out to an Azure app service, you can do it in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Starting from like creating it to deploying it out there. It's when you get into the more complex environments, if you've got multi-server setups, if you're creating infrastructure, if you're doing all that kind of stuff, that's where it starts to get a little bit harder to set up. But usually you're easing yourself into that by like, let's start with 1 deployment and then let's do 20 deployments. And so you can ease yourself in.
Yeah. And I think to his point though, he also says, once you have it, it works great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hey guys, great stuff. 2 quick questions. So app configuration, you mentioned out of the box has percentage-based conditions.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So is that like test and prod? I want 50% of people who hit it to see this feature on and 50% off?
Yeah, it's based on the number of hits, on the number of queries of getting it. So however often you retrieve that feature flag, 50% of the time or something like that. Yeah.
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, not different environments. It's not like, it's a feature that you would have either on or off.
Mm-hmm.
I gotcha. Okay.
The environment labels like we did, so you could have a thing that says 50% of the time in prod do this, and then a different one that says always on in QA. So yeah.
I gotcha. But you could do that on like your Angular app or HTML when the actual browser makes the request, check it, and 50% of users are going to get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
and all of a sudden I started getting complaints and turn it off.
Yeah, the thing, if you're coding that in your code, right, then that's a deploy if you want to change it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Second thing, this is more philosophical. So you mentioned here just a second ago that your infrastructure is just code.
It is, yep.
Kelly's the developer.
Yep.
I'm actually in a situation right now where your DevOps guys are, oh, you need a server? It's just code. Write the IAC to spin up the server. And they have a DevOps team. So are there any strategies or any thoughts on splitting what is DevOps, what is developer?
Yeah, sure. So when it comes
to... The reason it's called DevOps. It's developers and it's ops.
Right.
I believe that, and this is kind of, it is a philosophical discussion, that DevOps people are developers as much as they are ops.
That's
and
right.
They should be a part of the development team as much as they are a part of the operations team.
That's right.
So the idea of having a DevOps team that is isolated from, say, your product team, in my mind, that doesn't work. I think that they should be a part of your product team. So if I say, I'm working on this and we need a new server, I might have a DevOps skilled person on my product team who's like, I got it, I can write that infrastructure. So to me, it's a very integrated thing so that there shouldn't be that delineation, because then it's exactly like you said, where, sometimes there's a little bit of butting heads where they're like, it's just Terraform, can't you learn that and write that?
Yeah, and I totally agree. When it comes to like specialized code and everything, it's just like, don't have me create graphics, right? Everything will be square. but I can write code. That's my core competency. But not everybody on the team that I'm working with can write Terraform or even really understand all the intricacies inside Azure or their cloud provider. If you start saying, look, it's just Terraform, it's just code, that's really a poor way to look at that, because if it's just code, well, heck, man, that adds another thing that a developer has to worry about for what they're doing. Their job is to deliver the value of that application, really, a developer. Now, somebody that understands Terraform can certainly help, but having someone that focuses on infrastructure and operational type stuff and process is where the DevOps person kind of lies, right? Is that they understand how operations work, like a DevOps engineer. They understand how the infrastructure is supposed to work and how cloud providers work. They understand developers. Maybe they have a strong developer background. They understand how QA works, and then can tie all those in and see what, like maybe an operation guy doesn't understand, well, what does QA need a new environment for? They got a QA environment. What does the dev team need this other for? But the DevOps engineer kind of has that holistic view of everything. And yes, they should be the one, the DevOps person, I think. Again, if Kelly, you're different opinion, that's the person that really needs to understand and build out the infrastructure for the development team to manage. But when it comes into like DevOps, the tool, right? That's a different, it's another skill set, right? The DevOps, Azure DevOps is another skill set in addition to code, in addition to QA, in addition to IAC, in addition to monitoring and alerting inside of Azure and being an Azure, Microsoft Azure person, right? So there's a lot, and it's not always an easy cut and dry thing, but I don't think developers need to go learn Terraform and start building out infrastructure.
Yeah, it's just like you may not have your front-end developers be experts at SQL. So, that everyone's kind of got their specialty. And there's a reason for that. I wouldn't say it's just code. Why can't my JavaScript person write a stored procedure?
We'll talk.
Well, thank you.
I may need you to talk to my client.
That's what we do.
Thanks, guys.
So anytime.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any more questions?
Any other thoughts or questions?
Well, thank you guys. That was pretty cool. I think you guys have perfected your presentation. You're ready to take this thing on the road. That was nice.
We don't even have to get on the road.
It's all right. We take it on the virtual highway.
Yes.
The costume changes really made it. So
oh, thanks.
Pulling that out of your hat. That was cool. So anyways, thank you guys again for coming out, and big thanks to Kelly and Mike for giving us a great look at DevOps and app configuration and everything that's possible there. So if you have questions for Mike or Kelly after the fact, please reach out. I'm happy to put you in contact. Otherwise, everybody have a great holiday weekend, and please join us next month for what app devs should know about data, August the 6th. So please join our meetup, and until then, I hope everybody has a great one. So talk to you all soon.
Thank you, Kelly, Mike, and Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.